So this is Environmental Psychology, Unit 1, Part 2. So I'd like to give you a brief history of environmental psychology. Um, the field really started in around the 1950s with campaigns to improve mental hospitals because it was becoming clear that mental care in America was not really all that good. And there were a lot of reasons for that. For one, the dominant perspective was, psychoanalysis. So a lot of mental illness was blamed on relationships with parents and things like that, which we know now not to be true. And there were a lot of practices that went on in mental hospitals that were barbaric to standards of this day, including psychosurgery, so like lobotomies, but also the drugs that they gave people really were negatively impacting them. There were drugs like would make people like into zombies almost. So what people really began thinking is whether or not you could design hospitals, particularly mental hospitals, to better address the needs of the people, rather than being concerned with the structure of the hospital itself. And so they turned to psychologists for information on cognition and social and human behavior, and found that there really wasn't any school of thought out there that had to do with the design of space like this. And so this created a field which has been called architectural psychology, which is sort of a branch of environmental psychology, but what they really were interested in then is built environments, not natural environments, which came a little bit later as a topic of interest. So over the years, the problems expanded beyond situations that had to do with built environments and dealt with ideas about how to create parks and landscapes. So this created the field of environmental psychology. And this was a good development because, as we've learned to this day, that there really wasn't much thought put into the role of environments in thought and behavior, and that ended up really becoming a very important topic. And what researchers began doing is discovering the mismatches between humans and their environments. So they found that there are certain work environments that really made people perform less well than better. So it used to be believed that if you made an environment cold, people would work harder, and that didn't end up to be true. So when there's a mismatch between humans and their environments, they don't act in a way that's as accurate, and they're not as functional. So psychologists began trying to solve some of these problems through improved design. And so a field began that started with the design of that was investigating the color of walls and chair arrangements in mental hospitals, and it moved to topics like tracking visitors in national parks and studying the stresses that are associated with urban commuting, such as traffic studies. And all of us know a bit about what it's like to be in traffic. So that is one of those areas that really has gotten a lot of interest because of the fact that so many people spend so much time. I think the average amount of time that people spend in their car per day is about 80 minutes. So that's a lot of time to be spending in a little box on a highway. So some areas of studies have to do with wayfinding. How do people find their way around the world? I mean, if I asked you to take a walk from your house to the nearest Wawa, which is something I can only do in this region of the country, you would pretty much be able to figure out your way on how to get there. I think that it's Dollar Hoagie Day or whatever it is, Hoagie Fest, so that might motivate you to get up and go to the store. But if you go in the wrong direction, it's going to take you a long time to get there. So, wayfinding becomes very important. The effect of noise. Some people are very much affected by noise. They wake up at night at the slightest door closing somewhere, and other people are not that affected by it. Other people really hate silence, and so the effect of noise has become important. The interest in population density. Some people live in densely packed cities, in high-rises. How does that affect their social behavior and the effects of crowding? I have some pictures there from Japan of a crowd, and some people feel really anxious when they're in a crowd like this, and really try hard to get out of being in a crowd, because crowds can lead to dangerous effects like stampedes and things like that. Another area is the effects of urban life. The statistics just came out a few years ago that one half of the world's population now lives in urban areas, which is a deviation from the past. Urban life is a development of economics over the 20th and 21st century, and it's something that has not really been studied fully. Are there environmental solutions to urban problems? There's a lot of crime that is associated with people that are densely close to each other. Are there any way that you can design environments to have solutions to those? And also personal space and territorial behavior. There is a poet, Robert Frost, who once wrote famously, "Good fences make good neighbors." Is that true? Or is it better to not feel like there are territorial boundaries? These are all questions environmental psychologists would ask. Also, residential environments. People feel attachment to their homes. It's one of the reasons why you see people unwilling to leave their home, even if people are offering them a lot of money because of a development that they want to put at that location, that people really have an attachment to where they live. People get tattoos of their area code. I mean, what a silly thing to get a tattoo of the place where you live. I know my neighbor, down the street has a 215, which is Philadelphia's, traditional area code. And different preferences for the kind of environments. Some people like living in more rural areas and houses that are detached from each other. Other people like living in row homes. What is the source of those preferences? How satisfied were you with your home environment? And also with your neighborhood and community environments. Okay, some people really like being part of the neighborhood that they're in, and other people really hate their neighborhood, and they try to interact as little as possible with it. So those are issues and areas that are topics that an environmental psychologist would study. Another is institutional environments, so classrooms, hospitals, museums, prisons, designing for elderly populations. All of these are institutions that could be designed better and could benefit people by having better design. Particularly classrooms and hospitals, less so museums, because it's not like you're being forced to go to a museum, and prisons as well. But some of these settings are ones that either can be suboptimal. There's a classroom at Rutgers Camden's campus that has the worst auditory environment. You can't hear yourself think, let alone speak, in this environment because it's adjoining two other rooms. You can hear the people in the next classrooms. I hate teaching in this room, and in fact, whenever I'm assigned to that room, I usually go around campus and find myself a different room so that I can just move the class to the other room and not have to deal with it. So understanding how to design better environments can really improve learning, because no one learns in that terrible classroom on Rutgers campus. And work environments are similar. Some people work in cubicles. There are places called cubicle farms, which is depicted in that photograph there, where many, many, many people work in these little constrained spaces, and this is where they work. Some that works for some people and it doesn't for others. That's the issue of open plan versus private offices. Some businesses like having everything out in the open, whereas in other businesses it's better to have separate offices. So these are issues that are important, such as territoriality again and status, and also human factors. So how do people interact with a space that affects their working? Okay, are they more productive when they have neighbors that are noisy? Or is it better for everyone to have their own private little space? The problem with having your private little space is that when you're not being looked at, I'm sure that you've done this, been on the internet while, in a class, something like that, that affects your performance. And so these are questions that are worth asking. So some things to talk about before going ahead. What is the nature of an individual? Are we shaped by context? Or are individuals relatively separate from their context? Can you take a fish out of water? Well, obviously you can, but should you? Is it, are you so attached to your environment that if you were placed into a different environment, you'd have a hard time surviving? That's a question. I mean, this is why people travel to other cultures and find that the environment's very different. When I spent a year living in Japan, it was a very different world. I had to get used to an entirely different environment, which really made a difference? And how can we design better environments to capitalize on human competences and failings in order to maximize outcomes? Okay, so given that we have certain core competencies as human beings, we have our rational ability to think, but we also have failings because we're sometimes persuaded to make dumb choices because of the fact that we had a con artist come and try to convince us of something. How do we maximize outcomes given these environments that we can change in order to maximize human flourishing? And what role could environmental psychology play in the future of general psychology? So are there any lessons learned by environmental psychologists that could benefit all psychologists? So I just want you to think about some of these things before going on. Okay? So also, you have some good readings to go through this week and some good videos. So as part of this course, I am linking videos that are generally found on YouTube, but I'm also connecting you with some readings. I want you to do both because the quiz is going to ask you about stuff that's in this lecture, stuff that's in the videos, and stuff that's in the readings, as well as stuff that's on the webpage. So when you go to the unit and you read it, do everything, because unless it says this is a suggested reading, it's going to be on the quiz. Okay? Thanks a lot. I'll see you next unit.